Hi, Luis. It's great to have you here.
Thank you, Lauren. I really appreciate you having me.
All right, to kick things off, can you share a bit about your background and how you got into the field of leadership and strategy?
All right, how much time do we have?
Not enough time for the whole career story, probably.
I'll give you, yeah. So I'll give you, so I started as professor of fungal genetics at Michigan State University. Uh,
Hmm.
I thought that I had a mate, I married, I had a dog, a house, and everything. And then life threw me a curveball in the form of a brain tumor. So when I came back from the brain tumor, the doctor told me you have to accept the new reality, and your new reality is that you probably won't be back to teaching anytime soon because I have some cognition issues, and probably won't be walking straight for a long time. That was over 100 marathons ago, and I reinvented myself three times. So this is my third act, and I think that I found what I meant to be. So that's one of the things that I realized over time is that the world doesn't belong to the people that know the most, but to people that learn the fastest.
Yeah,
And that's been my mantra, like I might not know it, but I will learn it.
right. I love that. I especially in this day and age where like you've got AI, you've got layoffs, you've got career pivots, like people need to hear that it's okay to be on your third act, fourth act. I know
Absolutely.
we hear second act and we're like, oh, max, we get two. And it's like, you're living proof that's not true. And that you sometimes the pivot is exactly leads you to exactly where you're supposed to be. So I love that story. You had an article. I mean, one of the focuses of this episode is that you had an article that was in Harvard Business Review. We'll make sure that we link it in the show notes. And it was what to do when you're told you're not strategic enough. So, what first inspired you to address this issue? And why do you think this is such a common challenge in the workplace to be told, quote, you're not strategic enough? Or maybe another way people have heard it is like, you know, I'll help you with the strategy. I know that's not your strength. Or, we're going to be strategizing over here and you're kind of left out of that conversation.
Um, so I, as a person of color, married to a woman of color as well, this is very personal to me because I was given that particular feedback and I didn't know what to do with it. My wife was given that feedback and she didn't know what to do with that. It wasn't until I started coaching that I realized that when people tell you that you're not strategic enough, sometimes and many times, the majority of the cases is because they don't have the language to tell you what you need to know. So they use you're not strategic enough as a proxy for their lack of clarity on the things that
Right.
they're uh, and I kept hearing this over and over again. People tell me that I'm not strategic enough. People tell me that I'm not strategic enough. And as I start digging in, I realize that it's not a strategy what they're looking for, but they're looking for something that they feel that it is a strategy in their minds. So I'll give you a quick example. I was coaching a woman of color, and then they told me that she wasn't strategic enough. She wasn't strategic enough at all. When I went looking at what do you define a strategy, how do you know that she's strategic and not strategic enough? And they told me, her presentations are horrible. Her presentations are too long, blah, blah, blah. She doesn't present the strategy. We work on her presentations alone. And all of a sudden, she not only was strategic, but he had a much, much more executive presence. So it wasn't the fact that they were looking for a strategy, but just better presentations. And I
Right.
think that is what I've seen a lot of times is that people tell you that you're not strategic enough, not because you lack a strategy, but because in their narrow view, that you're not feeling something that they want to to see in you, and it might
Right.
not be a strategy at all. So that's
Right.
what inspired me to write it.
I have also found this to your point, it's a proxy. So when they're telling you that you're not strategic enough, they're really trying to say something else, but they don't have the language. And they might not, to be fair to them, they might not totally know what that is. They just know
Absolutely.
yeah,
Yeah.
they don't walk away bought in or influenced to whatever you're doing, right?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, as I said, people use it as a proxy, but not because of my intent, but because they don't have the language or it's not clear for them what they're looking for.
Yeah, yeah, I could totally see that. One of your key points in the article is about aligning with a company strategy. For someone who's not sure if they're misaligned, what signs should they be looking for? They've been told they're not strategic enough, and so they probably immediately start thinking like, well, what is my street strategy? How can you make sure you are aligned and you're doing the impactful work that matters to your company?
Um, that's a whole podcast and a whole book. Let me see how. Okay. So I think that there are three things that we need to realize. Is like if you're doing great work in your mind and you're like killing it, but it's not being seen, and that it doesn't seem to count. That is a misalignment that you have right now, right?
Right.
If your team moves fast, you're delivering, you're doing the great work, but it is invisible and there is no recognition on that. That is, another sign. If you don't connect the goals of the organization with the value that you bring, so like for instance, if let's say if your job is to fill up water bottles, all the time you're just filling water bottles, and you see that your job as a water bottles filling when the goal is to end thirst, then that is a misalignment. When you see your job as a task rather than the ultimate goal of the organization, and if you don't know that, you need to find it out.
Hmm.
So misalignment feels sometimes that you're running hard, you're doing everything hard, but you don't know why or how.
Right. It's like connect, how do you connect the dots between what you're doing and why it matters? It's funny, my boss is constantly saying like the why, she'll be like, why is this important right now? Why does this matter right now? And it's so funny because sometimes like I know the question is coming and it like still trips me up. Sometimes I'm like, I don't know this answer. Or like this is a really good idea, or like this thing's really good, but if I can't answer that, you immediately have this panic of like, or this internal thought of like, oh, I'm not strategic enough. It's that imposter syndrome comes out as I'm not strategic enough sometimes too, which is probably also something that happens. And maybe you haven't necessarily been even told that you're not strategic enough, but you could ask a question, you don't know the answer, and immediately you're like, it's because I'm not strategic enough. I don't know this. I can see this coming from both sides, like internally and also externally.
Totally. Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
Um, so, okay, in terms of company strategy, first, a couple other things. I would say, in order for you to be able to make sure that you're aligned, your manager or your company has to have a strategy that they are communicating. Also, if you are unsure of maybe what the strategy is, like what are some good ways to ask your boss, like, especially if you're feeling a little nervous, or maybe they've presented the strategy and you're like, I'm still not quite understanding it so that I can, do my part. Do you have some like, usually using some emotional intelligence strategies as well in a way to ask this so you don't feel like,
A lot of times, managers don't even know the strategy as well. So if you're going to ask, your manager and he doesn't have the answer, then you're stuck. And
yeah.
I think that, if you are, I assume that most of your leaders are, successful at where they are. They can read and they can go to the organizational, the website and look at them. What is the strategy? What is it trying to do? I mean, every single company has already, their goals and their strategy and their goals, the long-term goals in the internet. So that's what you need to look at and then connect those. You don't need to be told what the strategy is. You need to make assumptions about what the strategy is and then start thinking about it. Where do I fit in this strategy? How does the thing that I do actually fits in this strategy? Because
Mhm.
that's how we can connect our work with the ultimate goal of the strategy.
Hmm. One part I've seen with strategy that I think you kind of touched on, like the woman in the beginning of the story, where it was like, it wasn't that she wasn't strategic, her presentations were great. I do think communicating strategy or influencing others with what your strategy is really important. Are there some, I don't know, key tips or techniques people can do to really document their strategy so then they can like share it with others? I almost think of this as like a campaign. Like once you have your strategy, you want to sort of campaign and let other people, usually within your organization, know like this is my strategy, this is what I'm trying to do. I would imagine that going from talking about your strategy or thinking about it to writing it on paper is really challenging. Are there any like key things you want to put in there that don't make it longer than a page, things like that?
Well, so first of all, let's define what a strategy is. We started with like you're being told that you're not strategic enough, and then we haven't even defined what the strategy is. So that's number one. Number two, I think that there are two elements that there is a strategic thinking that's internal. How do you
Mhm.
think of, and then is strategic presence, how people see you. Yeah, so I'm going to connect those 3 points in a minute. So I think that first of all, a strategy is about big bets. And a lot of times people feel, and I've seen it, that people think that planning is a strategy. Planning is not the strategy. The strategy is at the highest level. So give me a quick example. One thing that I want to do is I want to be perceived, or I want to be taken as a thought leader. Let's put it that way. Uh, uh, so my strategy is four things. You know, create content. I'm publishing, like in high rewarded, high level organizations like HBR or Fast Company, create content. Number two is social proof. And being with you is part of the social proof, oh my God, this guy's being invited to that podcast. Number three is networking with people that are like me or people that I want to aspire to be. And number five for me, and number three for me is to provide an incredible coaching experience for my clients. That's my strategy. You see what I'm saying? The
Yeah.
planning is okay. I'm gonna write these articles. That's the planning. So that's number one. The strategy is the big bets. The strategy is no, we're gonna do X, Y, and Z. The strategy is these are the four things that if we do, we're gonna accomplish it. What
Yeah.
we want. All right. So that's number one. Then we're talking about strategic thinking. I mean, a lot of times, we are strategic. What we need to do is to be a strategic, have the strategic presence. And the tips for that is that everything that you do doesn't necessarily has to be tied to a strategy, but the way you think signals that you're strategic. So give you an example. A lot of times we focus on what we need to do. The key is not just thinking what we need to do, but what is the impact or what are the consequences of that 2, 3 steps ahead. So like for instance, give an example. Sometimes we wanna personal example, I'm gonna lose weight, so I'm gonna just reduce my intake of proteins or calories, that's what I need to do. The second order consequences is that if I do that, then I'm gonna have more energy. If I do that, I'm gonna look better. If I do that, I am going to have a little more self-confidence. You see, so I am thinking 4 steps ahead. So that's what we need to do. It's like if you're gonna be given, okay, you need to make coffee for the meeting. Okay, so let's make coffee. That is the task. How do you turn that into a strategy conversation? Is okay, what is the purpose of that? Okay, so it be coffee, but some people might not drink coffee. Maybe you should drink water. You see what I'm saying? So that's how you start thinking about the strategy. That is how you do it. But most importantly, you need to talk about it. That is strategic presence. Oh, so let me think about this. If we do X, that. You see what I'm saying? So that's the key. Is strategic thinking is one thing, and strategic presence is another.
Yes, I totally follow this because you could be the most strategic thinker in the world, but unless you're talking about it and making it known, it's like advocating for yourself at work. And we've talked a lot on this podcast about why that's so important to be advocating and making sure people, and you don't have to be like overly loud in their face about it, but you can like subtly mention like, yeah, the meeting ran on time today. I made sure that I knew everyone's drink orders ahead of time. Like something small
Oh,
like that, going back to your example. Yeah, I totally, totally follow that. I'm
and,
curious.
and just to make clear, I think that we all should have a strategy.
Mhm.
Like my personal strategy is commitment, persistence, and optimism. I'm gonna be committed to the things I do. I'm gonna be persistent at the things that I committed to do. I'm gonna be optimistic about the outcome. And I tell people that, that's how I do things. Blah blah blah. So I think that everybody has to have a personal strategy as well and talk about it like that, like with those words. This is my strategy will work.
Right.
I'm gonna create. I'm gonna be an empowered individual. So whatever that is, the 3 or 4 things, and then when you start acting on that, things start moving forward.
Do you think it's important? I mean, you talked about having a strategy for work. Do you think it's again like there's the planning and the task. Like, how much of when you communicate your strategy for work should also be like, my goal is this thing? Like, for example, if your strategy is to, I don't know, launch a project, is that the strategy, or is the strategy that that project is going to impact, I don't know,
That's it.
customers? And it's not,
That's it.
okay. All right.
So the strategy has to have what I call an aspirational goal. The aspirational goal is we're going to impact how the world see X. And these are the four things that we're gonna do to the four bets that we're gonna do that. Think
Mhm.
about Facebook. The strategy of Facebook was at the beginning is connect the world or something along the line. The strategy, the aspirational goal for Google is what is it? Organize the world's information or something along. So that is the moonshot. Isn't
Got it.
it? And then you convert that into plan. How are you gonna get there? And
Mhm.
then to the four bets that I'm talking about. We're gonna do X, Y, and Z. And then underneath that, then we talk about the SMART goals, and that's the planning that we're talking. That most people confuse with the strategy, but that's not what it is. That's planning to achieve. To get to the strategy.
Okay, I'm totally following it now. I am curious, for someone who's listening to this who maybe is saying, I want to, I'm not a senior leader right now, but I want to kind of think and act more strategically and come across like that senior leadership type level thinking. What is something they can do in their day-to-day work? And you talked a little bit about it, like making sure people know what you're doing and how it relates. What are some other day-to-day things to kind of show like I am strategically thinking about this. I do have a strategy here that I'm executing on through my plan and my goals, that kind of thing.
I think that a lot of, as I said, the key here is to make sure that people see us as strategic, and strategic is how we ask questions. I mean, as opposed to instead of saying how we're going to do this, ask why are we doing this?
Yeah.
What about, and that allows them then to start thinking about the steps ahead and what is the purpose of this, as opposed to can we make it? Can we do it? As opposed to should we be doing this?
Yeah. That's like
So
my boss. She's the queen of asking like, why does this matter right now? Why are we doing this?
absolutely. So that's, so that way, yeah. And to tell you the truth, a lot of people, don't ask those questions because that implies sometimes dissent and sometimes implies that you're being resistant. And especially for women of color, that is dangerous, So I
Yeah,
think that what we need to do is like, I want to understand why, how can I do this better if I understand the why behind it? So it's
totally.
questioning not because I want to be resistant, but because I want to do a better job.
Yes, absolutely. And to your point, sometimes asking too many questions can look like you're disagreeing or you're picking it apart or quote difficult to work with, but there are a ton of ways to be able to ask. But I like the way you said, can you help me understand yada yada. Honestly, if someone put this into chat gpt could probably rewrite, here's 5 different ways to ask a question without it you know irritating the other person.
Absolutely. I, 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 I ask questions all the time. And because I ask questions all the time, people thought that I wasn't good enough.
Mhm.
You see what I'm saying? So a lot of times when you ask a lot of questions, the people say, well, she's learning, he's learning, or he needs to understand, or he's at the beginning of his career or whatnot. So I think that asking too many questions can also be detrimental to your strategy. So the key
Mhm.
is how you ask the questions and how do you make sure that the questions don't come across as resistant or lack of information. You see what I'm saying? So
Yeah.
I, by the way, I wrote an article about when you ask too many questions and how.
Okay, so we'll put that in the show notes too, in case someone was feeling that way. I think what I've noticed is I think something happens in, especially in meetings where some people are asking questions truly because they're strategic thinkers, and other people are asking questions just to make sure their voice is heard. And I do feel like you can tell the difference. Maybe not right away, but over time, you can tell the difference of who's kind of just making noise and who's truly trying to understand. And I think like the value of the question you're asking is part of that, right? Like your strategic thinking comes across like are you asking the basic question that was in the worksheet that you just didn't read, or are you asking a question that's like, I read this, I understood it, but I'm trying to connect the dots between here and the next thing, right?
Yeah. And I have a strategy for that.
Oh, great. Let's hear it.
Simple. Talk last. Talk minimum and talk and speak last. And the reason why is because in meetings, people will remember the last point that was made, not the first point, not the second point, the last one was made. So when things are like that, just let them talk, you
Hmm.
know. And then when the meeting is about to end, then you can come and say, I've been thinking about it, I've been hearing about it. I think that blah, 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 blah. So you made your point at the last, and that will be the thing that most people remember.
Hmm.
Because you say your point at the beginning, by the second of the meeting, everybody already forgotten what you said.
Yeah, it's true. I'm curious too for someone, okay, so let's say you've been given this feedback, you're not strategic enough, you start to make some of these changes. I'm thinking a lot, like in my company, documentation is a really big deal, right? We're a huge company. To your point, like a lot of companies have their own wiki or intranet or something like that. So there's a lot of trying to make sure other people also understand what you're doing. What about some tips for kind of getting buy-in for your strategy, and documenting it so that you can share it with people and get their feedback? Is that something you should be doing? Like, how does it work once you sort of put your strategy down on paper, and you're trying to get buy-in, or again, get people to see that you are a strategic thinker about this?
So again, strategy is seen by nature, we're very selfish.
Hmm.
You know, see things from our own perspective a lot of times. And a lot of times we want people to see what we're doing from our perspective. And I think that that is fine, okay, but another way being strategic is actually going to people and say, I'm thinking about doing X, Y, and Z. What do you think about that?
Yeah.
And then sometimes it's not necessarily you already know the answer. You see what I'm saying? But you just want to signal to people that their uh, um, opinion matters.
Hmm.
You create your strategy, you create your slides, and then you say, hey, I took in consideration and it's right there. What you told me helped me tremendously to build this. And then you're getting buy-in because they gave you
Advice. Yeah.
you see, as
Yeah.
opposed you coming up with everything, and a lot of times, to tell you the truth, that's a lot of times that we do. I don't want people to take credit for what I did. And I think that the key is taking credit is one thing. Giving credit is a different thing. When you give credit to people, you still get credit for building what you're building.
Absolutely. And I think also collaboration, right? They collaborated with you to come up with this strategy or the planning or whatever part that you are looking for their help with, which gets a natural buy-in because they're part of it, to your point.
Correct. And so the key here is that a lot of times, we think that if we ask for people, they're gonna take credit, and that's okay. You give them credit because when you give people credit, you get the ownership of that.
Yeah. So, what would you say as we start to kind of wrap up? If somebody it feels like they do all of this and that they are really strategic, and then they're given the advice, you're not strategic enough, especially in like a performance review or something like that. What's some immediate actions they can take, especially if they're like, I strongly disagree with what you just said?
I think that if you disagree publicly in there, you're being defensive.
Mhm.
We're being And I think that the key here is to understand what a strategy is like. And instead of asking, hey, can you tell me, what is a strategy? Or you ask me, who's in your mind, who is strategic here? What being a strategic means in this organization? You know, you've been curious about it. You're not
Mhm.
defending your stuff. You're not defending, or a lot of times also, you can think about it. Who is the best strategist here? Who
Mhm.
can, and then just observe what they do, and then start doing that. At the same time, you need to start talking about your strategy. You need to start talking and saying things about what you consider the strategy organization and how you can actually connecting your work to the organization goals. Now, this doesn't happen overnight. this is a long game,
Right.
especially if you were giving that particular feedback, it is an uphill battle, but it's an uphill battle that if you make progress, you will reach the top, so don't be discouraged because that's the way, that's the name of the game.
Right. Yeah, no, I love that. I interviewed someone years ago, who in her famous line, it was about likability and how often women are told they're not likable. And then it would be like, well, compared to whom? And often the comparison was to a man. So I really like your advice of if you're told that you're not strategic enough and you're like, I do not agree with that, ask them what does strategic look like in this company compared to whom? And sometimes that can tell you a lot. And I think going back to your very first point about sometimes they're saying the word strategic, but it's something else. And maybe through questions and curiosity, you can get to the bottom line because oftentimes they might not know what that is right away, right?
Absolutely. The other thing that I think that is important when you're giving that particular feedback is there is one thing that I call organizational memory. Other people call it organizational drift, memory drift. Is the idea that the people judge you based on who you were,
Yeah,
as a, despite of the work and despite of the growth that you have experienced. So when you're given that particular feedback, make sure that you in your mind is a pivotal point for you. From now on, this is what I'm gonna be doing. And
right,
when you to them and say, since the last time we talked, how do you see me now?
right.
Because you don't put that framework, they're gonna still judge you based on the feelings or the memories that they have from 2 years ago.
Yeah,
So I put a frame, literally put a starting point on when you're gonna start being strategic in their eyes, and
hmm,
then start doing it and asking, since we talk, how do you see me now?
yeah.
How do
I,
you see me now?
I think I really like this. I wrote down organizational drift because I want to have an episode on this because I think this happens a lot to people, especially when they move around in companies and they stay somewhere for a while. I was also thinking to document it for yourself a little bit so that because we forget these things too, but sort of kind of document internally your wins, the strategic things you're doing when you kind of put these things into action so that you have like I have a private Slack channel that I keep for myself and it's just like a running list of stuff for me. And I think those markers are really, really important so that you also know, so you can remind them, oh, you're referring to something that was before this thing, this like big event happened. Yeah, that's really, really helpful.
Absolutely.
Luis, this has been so helpful. I love this conversation. I think it's so relevant to so many of us today in our careers who are navigating this like very gray area as well. Where can people, and I'll put a link to both your articles in the show notes. Where can people, follow you, learn more about your content, and anything else that you want to share with them?
So LinkedIn is the best place. I hope that you can put my LinkedIn link.
Yeah, in the show notes. Yep, we'll do that.
I also have a website, it's velascoaching.com. You can follow me there as well. What I have done is I created a little self survey to differentiate between your strategic thinking and your strategic presence. And I'll send you a link so people can download it from the from your site.
Yeah, we love that. Okay, so in the show notes, just to recap, you guys will have the articles, we'll have Lisa's LinkedIn link, and then he made a strategic thinking versus strategic presence audit that you guys can take, and we'll put all of that in the show notes. Thank you so much. This was so helpful.
Lauren, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.